Hello, hello. Right, today I am talking about debt, and I'm talking about managing debt, which essentially what I'm talking about is how to eliminate debt that you've already got. And I'm doing it over Debt Awareness Week here in the UK. So it's a very timely discussion at the moment. So let's get started. So, first things first, what actually is debt? So debt is an amount of money borrowed by one party from another, which must be paid back and typically with interest. So interest is the cost of borrowing money and it's expressed as a percentage of the total amount owned. Now, the reason interest is usually charged is because interest compensates the lender for the risk of lending money and for foregoing other investment opportunities. So, if I was lending money to you, I would definitely want interest back because that otherwise, if I hadn't lent the money to you, I'd be investing it and getting a return. So it's compensation for what else I could basically do with that money. So the key components are principal, interest rate, and repayment term. So the principal is the original sum of money borrowed. The interest rate is the percentage charged on the principal by the lender. And the repayment term is a time period over which the debt must be repaid. So let's say I lend you £1,000 at 10% interest. Well, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Over a 1 year payment term. So, and you can pay me back at the end of the payment term. So that means at the end of 1 year, you will need to pay me 10% interest, which on £1,000 is £100. So what you will repay me is £1,100. Now, if you were to repay me monthly instead of at the end of the year, and the interest was still 10%, the amount of interest you would pay me back because you pay me monthly would be less than £100 because you had not had the full £1,000 for a period of 1 year. So that's kind of how interest rates work too. Okay, so we've got over the basics. Let's move on. So I want to talk about the main types of debt. Now I'm going to put my hand up here and say I've been guilty of talking about good debt and bad debt. And a lot of financial experts today still talk about good debt and bad debt. But the reason I don't is because I think the terms the terms good debt and bad debt is quite judgmental. And I think there's enough shame around money and debt as it is without using judgmental language too. So what I talk about is three types of debt now: strategic debt, essential debt, and non-essential debt. So strategic debt is essentially borrowing with a plan with a view to improving your financial situation in the long run. So that could be like a student loan. And many people, the reason why they get an education and they take out a student loan is because they want to improve their job prospects in the future. So potentially, that would lead to a higher salary in the future. It could be a mortgage to buy a house with a view to ultimately owning that house outright. It could be a loan to start a business, which would also bring an income in the future. So that's strategic debt. And then there's essential debt. And I think essential debt is really important, particularly in this day and age, because a lot of people are needing to go into debt just to keep themselves afloat, just to pay their basic bills like mortgage or rent or medical expenses. And that's particularly in countries like maybe the US, or even putting food on the table for the family. So essential debt is debt that's necessary and it's been taken on in order to maintain a basic lifestyle or dealing with urgent needs. And then there's non-essential debt, which is spending on things you want but don't necessarily need, such as eating out or buying luxury items. And so this isn't directly beneficial to your financial stability in the long term. So that's the three types of debt. And the other thing I want to talk about is a reframe I use. So again, I think debt, the word debt has negative connotations associated with it. So a reframe I use is that debt is money already spent. In the same way that savings is money not spent yet, and spending is money being spent now. So these kind of distinguish between past, future, and present allocations of money. And I think, and I really like this, and it is true that, debt is money already spent. And I think one of the things when I do think about debt is, and when you're paying it back, is that you're paying for your past life, when in savings is, paying for your future life. So it really is about kind of the temporal nature of money, which is about time. Okay, so debt can be emotional. In fact, I think there's a lot of emotions associated around debt. So first of all, there's anxiety. I mean, there can be a lot of worry about being able to make payments on time, fearing unexpected expenses, and the uncertainty of the future can keep us up at night. So, there can be a lot of anxiety associated around debt. There's also a lot of guilt and shame, like feeling like we've failed or made poor choices. And this can weigh heavily on our shoulders too. And it's easy to fall into a spiral of self-blame and judgment. And one of the things I always say about debt, and particularly shame, is that it's really important to release that shame in order to be able to move forward. So I think it's, like forgive yourself, whatever it is you think you did, and release the shame and move forward. And then that puts you in a really good position to be able to do something about it. And there's also stress, isn't it? I mean, debt can strain relationships, it can impact mental health and affect our overall well-being. And, the pressure to keep up with payments can feel really overwhelming. So, and one thing I will say though, in terms of emotions around debt, I mean, these are obviously emotions around people who've got debt and aren't managing it very well. But one of the things I've found a lot with my clients is that when they start to deal with their debt, they actually have this huge sense of relief that they're finally doing something about it. So it's actually, there's some positivity or potential positivity in there too. So now what I want to talk about is 6 steps to detonate your debt. So these are my 6 steps. So the first one is to list all your debt. The second one is to review your debts and reduce the cost of them. The third one is to determine your debt repayment strategy. The fourth one is to review your spending and create a spending plan. Fourth one is to make more money. And the sixth one is to embrace automation. Right, so let's get started. So let's start on step 1, which is to list all your debts. Now, it depends on how many debts you have. If you've only got one, this is actually going to be really easy. It's not going to be such a problem. But if you've got a lot of debt, and I see a lot of people that have lots of debts. They have more than one credit card, maybe an overdraft, maybe a car loan, maybe a student loan, whatever. So it can seem daunting, particularly for neurotypicals, but it does need to be done. And as I just said before, that one of the things I do find with clients is that once I've done it, they actually often feel a sense of relief, like, okay, I know what I'm dealing with now, because otherwise it's like you've just buried everything and it's still haunting you. So there can be a sense of relief in actually knowing what you're dealing with. And what I'm talking about today is really dealing with personal debt. A lot of this can be applied to business debt as well. But I think the thing with business debt is it can sometimes get complicated depending on the structure of your business, depending if it's just you who's kind of a business owner, or you've got other owners in the business with you. So it gets complicated. So I just really wanted to stick to personal debt today, but a lot of this can be applied to business debt as well. So when you're writing down, listing all your debts, I want you to include all personal debts. That could be credit cards, overdrafts, car loans, student loans, other loans, outstanding bills. And the one thing I wouldn't include here, unless you really want to, is mortgage, because obviously mortgage is a long term and it's kind of a strategic debt. In fact, there may be other strategic debts as well that you may not want to include, like a student loan. Sometimes it depends of the really, really low interest rate, but certainly a mortgage, because of the nature of the mortgage, you might not want to include, but some people actually want to pay their mortgage back early. So maybe you do want to include it. And then what I want you to do is list who the debt's with, the amount of each debt, the annual interest rate, or annual percentage rate for the debt, and the monthly repayment amount. Now, if you do find this daunting, then you could get support. You could get an accountability partner who wants to do it. You could work with a financial coach, and you can break it down into smaller steps, like, because sometimes you've got to, if you haven't been looking at your bills and you've got to find your bills and you've got to sort it out. So, you can take your time if necessary. Okay. Step number 2, review your debts and reduce the cost of them. And the reason why this is important is if you can reduce the cost of them, then you're going to be able to pay them back quicker. So how do you reduce the cost of them? Well, you negotiate with your creditors for this, and you can approach each creditor in turn, and ask them for a payment break. So, that's a break without making any payments, or a lower interest rate. And we do have templates in the Mad About Money app that will help you with this, where you can write them a letter. And I think the key thing to tell your creditors is that you're actually serious about paying off your debt, and ask them what they can do to help as well. And the thing about creditors is what they don't want to happen is they don't want you to stop paying, your debt. They want you to pay it off, and it's actually in their interest to help you. So a lot of the time they're willing to do so. And the other thing is, you don't know if you don't ask, and you don't get if you don't ask. So it's definitely worth doing this. Another way you can reduce the cost of your debts is you can consolidate all your debts into a single loan, or it could be a remortgage of your property, or at a lower interest rate. And this can be a good idea because one, you get everything in one place and you know what you're dealing with, like one single debt. But it also depends on how much you owe in total. It might be difficult if you owe a lot to be able to get one single loan for that. And another thing you can do is you can transfer the balance of your credit cards to a card with a better interest rate. So ideally one with a 0% balance transfer. Now, if you're doing that, remember that 0% balance transfer often will only last for, say, a year. You need to check what that period is, because once that period is up, then, that will then revert to what the original interest rate is. So you'll need to take that into account in the future. And again, as I said, reducing the cost of your debt means that you can pay it back much earlier, and you can eliminate your debts more quickly, which is a great thing. So you've now got a list of the debts and the amount of money that you owe. You're ready to do something about it. So what debt do you pay off first? So as I said, if you only have one debt, then it's easy. But one thing you need to do is you need to differentiate between priority debt, and non-priority debt. So you need to pay off priority debts first. So priority debts are things like your mortgage, your rent, your council tax, your personal tax, your utility bills. Because if you don't pay these off, you could end up homeless, or you could end up in court. So this is really, really important. Pay off the priority debts first. And then for your non-priority debts, so this is things like your overdraft, your car loan, your credit cards. There's 3 main strategies for paying these off. So there's the avalanche method, the snowball method, and the emotional method. So let's start with the avalanche method. So you've already listed all your debts, but what you have to do with this method is now list them in order from the highest interest rate to the lowest interest rate. So say if you've got 5 debts and the interest rates are 10%, 3%, 7%, 6%, and 2%. you want to list them. I actually had to write those down while I was calling them out so I could actually say what order they go in. So the 10% one is at the top, then the 7%, then the 6%, then the 3%, then the 2%. So you've now listed them on order. And what you do with the avalanche method is you now target the debt with the highest interest rate first, while still making the minimum payments on the other balances. So what does that mean? So you've got 5 debts. So for 4 of them, you're either, if it's a loan, then you've got a monthly payment. If it's a credit card, you've got a minimum payment you have to make each month. So for the other 4, you pay either the monthly payment or the minimum payment for the month. And then for the target debt, or the one with the highest interest rate, so in this case, the one with the 10% interest rate, you pay additional money. So you throw as much money as you can at that in order to detonate it quickly. So that's how the avalanche method works. And then once that debt is paid off, so once you've paid off that debt with a 10% interest rate, you then target the debt with the next highest interest rate, which in this case is a debt with a 7% interest rate. And the reason why this is a great method is because this method costs the least. So over time, which you can imagine, because the debt with the highest interest rate is the one that's going to cost you the most. So if you can kind of pay that off first, then it's going to be a very cost-efficient method of debt repayment. Okay, that's debt repayment strategy number 1. So debt repayment strategy number 2 is called the snowball method. Now, the snowball method, again, you list your debts in order from the smallest balance to the highest balance. So again, let's take 5 debts. We'll put them in order. So you've got a £1,000 debt, a £3,000 debt, a £5,000 debt, a £7,000 debt, and a £10,000 debt. I put them in order. So what you do is you pay off the debt with the smallest balance first. So in this case, you pay off the debt with the smallest balance, which is £1,000, and then you still make the minimum payments on the other balances. So in the same way as you did with the avalanche method, you're still making either the monthly payment or the minimum payment each month on the 3,000, the 5,000, the 7,000, and the £10,000 debts. And when the first debt is paid off, so the £1,000 debt, you then target the debt with the second lowest balance, which is the £3,000 debt. Now, the reason why this is good, or the reason why this works, is it works for people who are more motivated by quick wins. Because with the avalanche method, when you're paying off the debt with the highest interest rate first, which in our example was a 10% interest rate, say that debt is a big amount, say it's £20,000, it's going to take a long time to pay that debt off. Whereas with a debt that's only £1,000, then you can pay that debt off quite quickly. And what it's going to give you is a quick win. And that can be really good to keep you going, to keep you on your debt repayment strategy. Because again, if you've got a large debt with the highest interest, with a high interest rate, and it takes you a long time to pay off, then you might become, you might not remain motivated for a long time, and you might actually give up on your debt repayment strategy. So this can be really good then for people who are motivated by quick wins. Right. The next one is the emotional method for debt repayment. So this, now you list your debts in order from the one causing you the most emotional distress or the most emotional stress to one causing you the least emotional stress. And you pay off the debt that's causing you the most emotional stress first, while still making the minimum payments on the other balances. And when the first debt is paid off, you target the debt that's now causing you the most emotional stress. Now, the reason this is good is because sometimes some debts are associated with emotional stress. So, for example, let's think of a good example, an ex. You had a toxic relationship with an ex who you owe money to, and all you want to do is get that debt paid off so you no longer have to deal with that person. If you're in a situation like that, then it's going to be better to focus on paying that debt back first, rather than debt with a high interest rate, or rather than a debt with a low balance, because this is what is going to be most beneficial to you overall. So this is really good for people who have emotional stress associated with certain debts. So I'm just going to go back a couple of slides just to remind you that in terms of debt repayment, one, pay off priority debts first. So again, mortgage, rent, council tax, utility bills, personal tax. I can't emphasize that enough. It is so important because that can really have an impact on your life if you don't pay those debts as quickly as possible. And these three strategies are for non-priority debt. So again, we've got the avalanche method, which is pay off the debt with the highest interest rate first. The snowball method, which is pay off the debt with the lowest balance first. And then the emotional method, which is pay off the debt causing you the most emotional stress first. Okay, so that's debt repayment. The next thing to do is to review your spending and create a spending plan. So either look at your spending over the last 3 months, or if that's going to be difficult because of the way you've managed your finances, maybe track your spending for 1 to 3 months. And what this allows you to do is actually to see where your money is going. And the whole point of doing this is to see where you can make cuts in your spending so that you can direct that money towards paying off your target debt. So from doing this review or tracking your spending, you'll be able to see what you spend money on. So I always say you have the big 3 expenses, which are housing, food, and transport, and then your other expenditure. And sometimes one of the things I find is that actually people are overspending on the big 3 or one of the big 3. And if that's the case, sometimes, particularly if it's housing or potentially also transport, they can be harder to adjust quickly. And I have seen this sometimes that, based on how much income someone's bringing in, the amount of money they're paying for rent is actually a large percentage of that. Now, that could be because of where they live. So, for example, if you live in London, your rent is potentially going to be a lot, it will be a lot higher than it is in other places in the UK. And sometimes you can make a bigger dent in your budget by cutting out these big 3 rather than, something small. So first of all, look at the big 3, look at areas that you might be overspending. Next, look at your other spending and, critique every expense. Now, obviously, there's going to be needs and there's wants. So, you're going to have utility bills, you're going to have to pay those. But there's a lot of stuff that are wants. I mean, do you need, one thing I see a lot is actually people that have subscriptions for, I don't know, Apple, Disney, Netflix, Amazon Prime for all 4. I mean, do you need all 4? Can you cycle them? Like maybe have one for 6 months and another one for 6 months, or 2 for 6 months and the next 2 for 6 months rather than having all 4. There's lots of different ways that you can actually cut costs. And when you're critiquing every expense, there's a few things I always say to ask yourself. So the first one is, particularly for your discretionary spending, so that's on, could be on things like your entertainment or your clothes or things like that, is it aligned with your values? I mean, what are the things that are really important to you in life? So for me, for example, one of the things I really value is adventure and travel. So I'm really happy to spend money on travel, but actually clothes, I don't need designer clothes. So that's not high on my list of things I want to be spending money on. So if I were to track my spending and find out that I've been spending lots of money on, expensive clothes, that would be the area that I would be looking at cutting rather than travel, because travel brings me a lot of joy. And actually, another way I look at my spending is ask myself, how much joy does this bring me in a Marie Kondo kind of way on a scale of 1 to 10? And if it's not a 9 or a 10, why am I spending money on it? So this whole exercise is to identify where you can make cuts and then implement those cuts into a spending plan. If you don't already have a spending plan, then create one. So that's about, listing how much money you plan to spend each month. Now, I will just say, actually, as an aside, I keep talking about months, and that's because here in the UK, we mostly work on a monthly basis. People who are employed generally get paid monthly. We pay our mortgages monthly, etc. But I do know that in other countries, that's not the case. For example, New Zealand, where I'm from, people generally get paid fortnightly. So things are done fortnightly. So whenever I'm saying month, you might want to change that to fortnight, or it could even be week, depending on your situation in your country. So yeah, so what you want to do is implement these cuts into a spending plan. So, for me, when I create a spending plan, I create buckets of money, like, there's my housing money, my food money, my transport money, my travel money, my utilities money, my clothes money, etc. And I am prepared to allocate more money to the things that I really love and get a lot of joy from. So things that are aligned with my values, than things that aren't. And that can be a way to make cuts. And another way, one of the best ways I find to make cuts actually, or particularly if you're starting out and you haven't really done this before, is subscriptions. And, there's so many things we pay subscriptions for this day and age. We're moving to a subscription-based, society, really. Look at your subscriptions that come out every month, whether it's gym membership, whether it's Apple TV, whatever it is, and ask yourself how much you used it in the last month. So that can be a really good place to start when you're trying to make cuts. Okay. So the next thing is, when you're trying to detonate your debt, one of the things you're trying to do, which is what I just said with the spending, is to have more money to throw at your target debt. And so obviously one way to do that is to cut your spending. But in lots of ways, you can only cut your spending so much. There's only so much fat you can take off your spending, because eventually you're going to kind of hit a limit, and, you can't trim anymore. So the best thing to do then, or actually the best thing to be doing at the same time, is to make more money. And whilst you can only reduce your spending so much, there's always room to make more money. So it's just a matter of doing it. And also, making more money is good for your financial health. So how do you make more money? Well, it depends on your situation. So if you're an employee, you can ask for a pay rise, or you could start a side hustle. If you're a business owner, you could launch a new product or increase your prices. It really depends on lots of different things. But like if you're an employee, for example, you're going to ask for a pay rise, then definitely have a justification for why you are deserving of that pay rise. I mean, don't just go in and say, oh, I've got debt, I need to pay off, I need a pay rise. It's, relate it to your job, relate it to what you've been doing, relate it to your performance, relate it to the market, etc. And then another way to bring in money, rather than I've become, when I'm talking about asking for a pay rise, or starting a side hustle, or launching a new product, or increasing your prices, that's kind of regular income. But there's also one-off income as well. And you can actually sell things you already have. Now, a lot of us have a lot of junk, but one person's junk is another person's treasure. So, you can be selling that on eBay or wherever you want to sell it. And, that again is money you can be bringing in that you can put towards your target debt to get that paid off, so that you can, ultimately, once you've paid off all your debt, become debt-free. And then step 6 is to embrace automation, because when you're paying off debt, or in fact, I think it's applicable to people who aren't in debt either, but if you can automate most of your spending, your bills, etc., then it becomes a lot easier. So, for example, if you're automating your bills and also automating your loan repayments and the minimum payments of your credit cards, then that's done for you every month, and then you'll have money left over. That will depend on your spending plan, that again you can be putting towards your target debt. So that is definitely really important. And then what else did I want to say about embracing automation? I think embracing automation is important for lots of other reasons. I mean, particularly important for people with ADHD, because we can be really forgetful with our finances. And there's also systems and apps for everything these days. So it's actually a lot easier than it was. But obviously, you do need to make sure you have enough money in your bank account each month to cover the payments. And one of the things I like when I'm doing automation is having everything go out on the same day. It makes it so much easier when I know how much money I need to have in my account on that day and it's sorted. So I tend to do the first of the month. And then for anything that's not automated, I try and make that payment on the first of the month too. So all the money's in my account. I make sure that money comes into my account at the end of the month. It's all in, ready for the first of the month, and everything, or as much as possible. There's a couple of things have managed to move, all come out, and it just makes life so much simpler. And then it means, for managing your debt and trying to eliminate the debt you have, you get a feel for, how much you can put towards that debt that month or that period, depending on what country you're in. So yeah, that's the 6 steps of, just going back, that's the 6 steps to detonate your debt. But I do want to say that these 6 steps are based on you being able to do it yourself. Although you might want to get an accountability buddy, you might want to get a financial coach. But if your debt is more worrying, these are some other options you might want to think about, and which I would, if you want to do these, and I would suggest you get support. And you can do that, for example, with organizations like Step Change. I'll come back to Step Change, actually. So the first one is a debt management plan. So that's kind of essentially what we've been talking about, but this is slightly more formalized. So it's basically creating a plan and then negotiating with creditors to agree to freeze your interest rates and accept regular fixed payments based on affordability. So that's the first one. The second one, and just to say, I'm not going to go into these in too much detail, because I think if you just want to highlight that they are there as options, but that if you are considering these, I really suggest that you get support. Well, you will need support for them anyway. For a debt relief order, that's for someone with no assets, and a very small amount of disposable income. You also can't owe more than 20K. But what a debt relief order does, it means that for a 12-month period, creditors cannot take any action to recover their money from you. So essentially gives you a bit of breathing space. Then there's the individual voluntary arrangement, the IVA. So this is a formal proposal for paying back the money owed. And in some cases, creditors may agree to wipe some of the debt. But in order to do this, you need an insolvency practitioner to draft the proposal. And then finally is bankruptcy, which is basically when you're unable to pay your debts back at all. But beware that, you could lose your assets, you could be barred from some jobs, etc. And the other thing I want to say about these is that obviously your credit score will be affected. So you need to take that into account when you're doing any of this. But I mean, to be honest, if you're in a lot of debt, your credit score is probably not going to be that great anyway. But these here, I really suggest, if you're going to do one of these, that you get support to do it. And there is always help. Like I would say, contact a charity like Step Change or the National Debt Line, particularly to do one of those 4 things. But even if you need support with, doing it on your own, these charities can help too. So that's definitely something else to be thinking about. Anyway, that is it from me today. So yeah, that's me talking about managing your debt here at Mad About Money. Feel free to come into the app. Tell us how you're getting on with your managing your debt and repaying it. Tell us what debt repayment strategy you're using. Tell us if you've contacted any creditors, because I think it's really important that we share what we're doing in the area of debt repayment, because other people can learn from you, and it's part of being part of a supportive community. Anyway, that's all from me today. Some a quick kind of short introduction to managing your debt. I hope you found it useful, and bye for now.